Story 1. About 20 years ago, 3 friends of mine and I went out for dinner. Keep in mind, we were all bar or restaurant owners or managers. It was a Saturday evening around 7 p.m. We arrived at Applebee's and were told we had to wait for a table. No big deal, we expected as much. We were laughing and chatting, but not in an obnoxious way. To clarify, we were standing outside the restaurant while waiting. Eventually, we were called in and seated. We ordered drinks, but to our surprise, the waitress and the manager informed us that we wouldn't be served because they believed we had been drinking beforehand. We exchanged confused looks, thinking it must be some kind of joke. The manager, wearing a big, fake smile, explained that company policy forbade serving alcohol to obviously intoxicated individuals. We knew there was no point in arguing, so without saying much, we got up and left. Next door, we went into Ruby Tuesdays. We sat at the bar, ordered sodas, and waited for a table. While chatting with the bartender, we shared what had just happened. The bartender called over their manager, and after hearing our story, she chuckled and said, "Yeah, that sounds about right for them. Don't worry, you guys seem perfectly fine. Enjoy a drink on the house." Needless to say, we had a much better experience there. Fast forward 3 months, and that Applebee's shut down for reasons unknown. A couple of months after that, something unexpected happened. The same manager from Applebee's who had refused to serve us walked into my restaurant looking for a job. She didn't recognize me, but I remembered her instantly. Coincidentally, one of the friends from that night was also in my restaurant having a drink. We exchanged knowing smirks as I began speaking with her. I asked her name, inquired about her experience in the business, and requested a copy of her resume. After reviewing it, I politely said, "I'm sorry to hear your previous place closed. You seem like you could be a great addition to my establishment. Except for one thing, you have a habit of turning away potential customers without giving them a chance to explain themselves." She gave me a puzzled look, clearly not understanding what I meant. I then reminded her of that evening at Applebee's. She claimed not to remember the incident, but without another word, she asked for her resume back and bolted out the door. Moral of the story: be careful whose toes you step on while climbing up, because you might have to kiss those same toes on your way down. Story 2. Backstory: for the past few years, I've been working as a nurse. I spent the first part of my career in the emergency department of a small hospital in Canada. This hospital handled basic admissions, surgeries, and critical care, but we would transfer severely ill patients to larger metropolitan hospitals that had more specialized services like cardiology or trauma surgery. Because the population we served was relatively small, the department operated with a minimal number of nurses, resulting in each nurse being responsible for an extra patient compared to other hospitals. Fortunately, the lower acuity level of our patients balanced out the increased workload. However, we were often overwhelmed during the latter half of the day shift and the beginning of the night shift, which were typically the busiest times. Despite being short-staffed during the busy periods, we usually had enough staff to handle the workload later at night when patient volumes dropped. Management didn't reduce staffing levels during the night, so we ended up being slightly overstaffed during those hours. Because we ran with a minimal number of nurses, we didn't have dedicated break coverage. If my nursing partner went on break, I had to watch double the number of patients. This wasn't a big deal at night, but during the day, it often meant missing our 30-minute unpaid break due to high workload. Another key detail is that we worked in teams consisting of one emergency nurse who had extra training and a higher scope of care, and one med-surg nurse, a seasoned nurse waiting for a spot in the emergency training program. This setup meant that the nurses gave and took report together, doubling the handover time because instead of each nurse handing over 4 or 5 patients individually, they handed over 8-10 patients together. Our union had negotiated a contract to prevent wage theft. This allowed us to sign for our unpaid 30-minute break at overtime rates 1.5x pay if we missed it, which happened about once every 2 days during a typical 2-day, 2-night rotation. Additionally, we could claim an extra 15 minutes of straight time pay if handover extended beyond our 12-hour shift. While management didn't like paying out these extra wages, they didn't make a fuss because, in reality, the nurses were also giving back time. On quiet night shifts, many of us would take an extra 30 to 45 minutes to sleep, which offset the lost pay from missed breaks and handover during busier shifts. This informal system worked well for a few years. Management saved money without affecting patient throughput, and the extra sleep during breaks helped maintain nurse well-being and made it easier to switch from night shifts back to day shifts. Everyone was happy. Then, one of the less pleasant charge nurses decided to put an end to it. The charge nurse role, essentially the unit supervisor, was typically filled by very senior emergency nurses. It's worth noting that emergency charge nurses worked rotating shifts rather than the usual 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday schedule seen in other units. This role came with extra responsibilities and stress, so I'll give the charge nurse the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Nonetheless, one morning, an email popped up stating that night shifts were to be limited strictly to union-mandated break times. I was annoyed, but understood that technically they were right. We were only entitled to 60 minutes of unpaid break time and 45 minutes of paid break time. Still, the email caused frustration because most of us followed the informal system responsibly, and only a few nurses had taken advantage of it. For example, one nurse who frequently covered charge shifts would take over 3.5 hours of break time during night shifts, even when the department was busy. This understandably annoyed everyone, but they were the exception, not the rule. The email quickly circulated in our group chats, and many younger staff members, millennials at the time who were well aware of our union rights, started signing for every missed break and extra handover time. They also helped older staff understand the contract and how to claim their due wages. That day, I missed my last break and stayed 15 minutes past my shift for report, so I claimed overtime pay and earned an extra $1.50 gross. The charge nurse was surprised when I presented the overtime form for their signature, but I politely explained that I was just following the rules to avoid pay discrepancies. During my next night shift, a sign-in sheet appeared on the desk for nurses to record their in and out times for breaks, along with a space to write our phone numbers so we could be called back early if needed. I refused to leave my number, stating that unless there was a code blue, a medical emergency usually indicating no pulse, I wouldn't return early. Code blues were announced overhead, so there was no need for them to have my number. Over the next 2 weeks, I meticulously documented every missed break and extended handover, signing in and out of my breaks to the minute. On night shifts, I spent a lot of time staring at my phone, waiting for the doctor to give me something to do since I had caught up on everything else. The extra pay from handover and missed breaks added up. For a full-time nurse, this could mean roughly $2 extra per year, a significant amount in a publicly funded healthcare system. Eventually, management noticed and sent a clarification. They stated that while they would sign off on extra wages if we wished, we could also choose to take extra sleep time on night shifts, provided we left our number. I asked them to send that clarification in an email. While I could have forwarded it to the union rep to make things official, I didn't bother. I had already gotten what I wanted, the extra sleep time back. I left that job later on and have been working at a much larger hospital for the past 2 years. Here, things are much better. We have dedicated nurses who cover our breaks. There are no teams, and management encourages us to take longer breaks when possible to prevent burnout, which was rampant at my previous job. I now carefully document my breaks and any extra sleep time to ensure it matches up. They even offer to sign for missed breaks to support staff retention. But my conscience doesn't let me take advantage of that. I'm just happy to get some well-deserved rest. Story 3. Hey there, folks. Grab a seat and let me tell you a wild tale that recently happened to me. It all started on a sunny afternoon when I decided to take a stroll through the local park. Little did I know, this simple outing would turn into an unexpected encounter with an entitled person of epic proportions. Now, before we dive into the juicy details, let me introduce myself. I'm Jake, a retired cop with a love for leisurely walks and peaceful afternoons. After dedicating many years to maintaining law and order, I was ready to enjoy a more relaxed lifestyle. I still had that cop instinct within me, though, and I couldn't help but intervene when I saw someone in distress. On this particular day, I noticed a commotion near the park's fountain. Curiosity piqued, I made my way over to see what was happening. There, in the center of it all, was Karen, a living, breathing embodiment of entitled behavior. She was locked in a heated argument with a young woman who seemed genuinely bewildered by the whole situation. Without thinking twice, I approached the scene, hoping to diffuse the tension and offer some assistance. "Hey there, what's going on?" I asked with a friendly smile. Karen's eyes widened as she turned her attention towards me. "Mind your own business, old man," she snapped, clearly not interested in any form of resolution. Ignoring her harsh words, I turned to the young woman, who looked visibly relieved by my presence. She explained that Karen had accused her of stealing her spot on a nearby bench. It was a petty dispute, but Karen had escalated it to an extreme level. "Listen, ma'am," I said calmly to Karen, "there's no need to cause such a fuss over a bench. Let's find a way to resolve this peacefully." Karen's face turned beet red as she clenched her fists. Her anger was palpable, and I could tell she was on the brink of losing control. "How dare you interfere? This is none of your business," she shouted, pointing a finger in my face. I took a step back, maintaining my composure. "Look, nobody wants any trouble here. Let's take a deep breath and talk it out like reasonable adults." But reason was not in Karen's vocabulary. She lunged towards me, her eyes filled with rage, ready to physically attack. Instinctively, I swiftly sidestepped her oncoming fury, causing her to lose her balance and tumble to the ground. It was a move I learned back in my days on the force, and it still came in handy from time to time. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the spectacle unfolding before them. Gasps of astonishment filled the air as Karen struggled to regain her footing. It was clear that her temper had gotten the best of her, and she was no match for the old retired cop. Seeing her defeated and vulnerable, I decided to take this opportunity to defuse the situation completely. "All right, folks, nothing to see here. Let's give Karen some space and let the authorities handle it," I said, gesturing towards a passerby to call the police. Within minutes, the park's security arrived, followed closely by a couple of uniformed officers. Karen's face turned pale as she realized her actions had consequences. Her attempted attack on a retired cop was a grave mistake. The officers approached her, listening to my side of the story along with the accounts of the other witnesses. It was clear to everyone that Karen's entitled attitude had led to this unfortunate outcome. As the police placed Karen in handcuffs, she let out a string of profanities, blaming everyone but herself for the predicament she found herself in. It was a stark reminder of the dangers of entitlement and the importance of treating others with respect. Once Karen was safely in custody, I approached the young woman who had been at the center of it all. She was still shaken but grateful for the help. We chatted for a while, exchanging stories and laughter, finding solace in the fact that this bizarre encounter had brought us together. In the end, justice prevailed, and Karen learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of her entitled behavior. As for me, well, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that nobody was seriously hurt. It was a reminder that even in retirement, the instincts of a cop can come in handy when needed. So there you have it, my friends, the story of Karen's failed attempt to attack a retired cop who simply tried to calm her down while she was fighting with an innocent bystander. It's a tale that serves as a reminder to us all to approach life with kindness and respect. And hey, if you ever encounter an entitled person like Karen, just remember to sidestep their negativity and let the authorities handle the rest. Stay cool out there. Story 4. Backstory. I'm of mixed ethnicity. Over the course of my 29 years on this planet, people have confused me for many different races, but I'm literally Caucasian and African American. Usually, it can be figured out, but what sets me apart is that my father is Caucasian, so I have straight hair. I'm originally from Texas and am often mistaken for being Mexican. Now that I live in Massachusetts, I've never had an issue with anyone regarding my race until this day. Also, I'm married to a Caucasian woman who had a child before we got married. His father is not in his life much, so I took on the responsibility because I love her and her son as if he were my own. He's 4 now, and I've been in his life since he was 1. The story. My wife needed a few things from the grocery store and had other errands to run. Usually, she handles these tasks herself because I'm tired from working nights. But that day, I was awake and offered to go for her so she could relax. I also took my son along for some bonding time. We completed the errands smoothly and headed to the grocery store to wrap up our day. My son, being a typical 4-year-old, was full of energy running ahead, laughing, and saying hello to everyone he met. I didn't mind as long as he stayed within my sight. While I was in an aisle looking for canned corn, my son ran to the end of the aisle where an older lady was entering. He cheerfully introduced himself, saying, "Hi, me 4 and me Ryan, bless his little heart." The lady responded, "Well, hello there. You shouldn't be running around unattended. Let's go find your parents." I didn't think much of it, assuming she hadn't seen me yet. "Ryan, come back here, bud, please," I called out. He ran back to me, giggling and spinning around as kids do. As I turned my cart around to head toward the cash registers, the lady suddenly blocked my path. I said, "Excuse me," and tried to go around her, but she moved her cart in front of me again. Thinking she was confused, I politely said, "Excuse me," once more and attempted to pass her. She blocked me again. The following conversation ensued. "Me? Sorry about that. We'll get out of your way." Lady, "Oh, I don't think so. You're not going anywhere with that child." Me, "You mean my son?" Lady, "That's not your child. He's white, and you're Mexican. You probably didn't even know his name until he said it to me." Me, "Sure, whatever. Lady, can you just move? My wife is at home waiting for us." Lady, "Stop your lies. You're not taking him anywhere, you pervert." At this point, my son clung to my leg, clearly scared. I was getting angry because I hadn't had much sleep, and I have a short fuse, thanks, Dad. Me, "As you can see, he's standing close to me because he trusts me, and you're scaring him. How about you buzz off?" Lady, "No, he's scared because of you. He just doesn't know how to express it yet." She looked at my son and said, "Come on now, sweetie. I'm here to rescue you. Come with me." Thankfully, my son told her he wasn't going anywhere with her. But she wasn't having it. She grabbed my son and began to run. I was caught off guard, unable to believe what was happening. My son screamed loudly in fear while the lady shouted, "Don't worry, sweetie. He won't hurt you, I promise." It took a moment for reality to snap back, but I immediately started chasing after her, yelling for people to stop her and that she was kidnapping my son. Fortunately, a store employee stopped her before she could reach the exit. "Lady, why are you stopping me? This Mexican here is trying to kidnap my grandson." My son was crying hysterically, reaching out for me. Despite him slapping her repeatedly, she wouldn't let go. A manager arrived, and the lady quickly spoke up. "Lady, this pervert is trying to kidnap my grandson, and I was just trying to save him." Me, "That's my son, you psycho. Let him go." The manager didn't know what to believe, understandably. I showed him pictures on my phone of me and my son from over a year ago. The lady still wouldn't give up, claiming the pictures were fake. To make matters worse, 2 other women took her side, saying there was no way we were family because of our different skin tones. One of them even called the police, which I welcomed because I knew the security cameras would prove my case. I also called my wife to come down to the store to help clear things up. She arrived just as the police did. As soon as my son saw her, he cried, "Mama, help!" My wife, ever the mama bear, flew into a rage. "Wife, let him go now." Lady, "Sorry, sweetie, I was just trying to protect him from this pervert." Lady 2, "Yeah, we saw him trying to kidnap the child, but this lady saved him." Officer, "I thought you said this was your grandson." Wife, "I have no idea who this lady is." She showed the officer pictures of my mother-in-law, And the officer turned to the lady. Officer, would you like to press charges? Lady, yes, I would. Officer, why would I be asking you that question? Shut your mouth and sit down. He turned to me and repeated the question. Me, absolutely. The lady was charged with attempted kidnapping, false imprisonment, providing a false police report, and child endangerment. The other two women were charged with providing a false police report. To make matters worse for the lady, my son bruises easily, and she left noticeable marks on him, adding a charge of child abuse to her record. We have a court date later this year, but I'm unsure when due to COVID. The officer will follow up with me in a few weeks. Thankfully, my son is fine, though he was shaken up by the ordeal. My wife and I are still trying to process the whole thing, but we're relieved it didn't end worse. Story 5. So, let me tell you about my dear neighbor Karen. Yes, that Karen. You know the type? Clipboard in hand, self-righteous attitude, always sniffing out problems that don't exist. She's not even on the HOA board, but she acts like she's the president of the universe. The issue started when I decided to brighten up my yard with some colorful flowers. Nothing outrageous, just a few daisies, tulips, and a small garden patch. Harmless, right? Well, not according to Karen. One afternoon, she stomps over, waving her little HOA rulebook like it's the Bible, and she's Moses coming down the mountain. Those flowers aren't in compliance, she screeches. You're violating Section 12.4. Only native plants are allowed. I try to reason with her. Karen, the HOA guidelines just say the yard has to be well maintained. These flowers are fine. But no, Karen wasn't having it. She insisted she was going to report me to the HOA because rules are rules. Fine. You want me to follow the rules, Karen? I'll follow the rules. So, I did some research and found every obnoxious native plant I could get my hands on. Thorny bushes. Check. Spiky grasses. Check. A massive yucca plant that looks like it wants to eat small animals. Oh, you better believe I planted that front and center. By the time I was done, my yard looked like a post-apocalyptic jungle, but every single plant was 100% native to the area. And let me tell you, I double-checked the HOA guidelines to make sure I was bulletproof. Karen comes stomping back a week later, furious. This is unacceptable, she yells, flailing her clipboard. Your yard looks terrible. Oh, Karen, I said, with the sweetest smile I could muster. You were so right. My flowers weren't compliant. But these are all native plants, just like the rules you pointed out. Isn't it great? She sputtered like a broken engine and ran off to the HOA. They reviewed my yard and, guess what? Completely compliant. Karen ended up getting a warning from the board for harassing neighbors. Now I sit on my porch, sipping coffee, surrounded by my chaotic jungle of compliance, while Karen avoids making eye contact every time she walks by. It's the little victories, you know? Story 6. My boss has a bad habit of giving discounts to his friends, often below the company's minimum pricing standards. These discounts are problematic because, despite these customers not being my friends, I am still assigned to do the work. Since these customers pay less, my commission is reduced accordingly. For example, if an $1.80 bill is discounted, my pay drops from what it should have been to something like $1.16. I've brought this issue up multiple times over the years, suggesting that if they want to give friends a discount, fine, but my cut should still be calculated based on the full market price. Each time I raise this point, my boss pulls out his phone, uses the calculator, and dismisses the difference as insignificant, often saying something along the lines of, "It's only $4, what's the big deal?" This response is incredibly disrespectful. If the amount is so small and meaningless, then why is it so hard to pay me what I'm owed for doing the actual labor? Beyond the principle of the matter, these small amounts add up over time and make a noticeable dent in my paycheck. On top of that, we're not a particularly financially successful company, and we can't afford to be giving out discounts to begin with. Yet, somehow, this penny-pinching behavior continues to be justified under the guise of long-standing customer relationships and company policies. While nothing illegal is happening with my pay strictly speaking, it's an ongoing pattern of disrespect and a lack of basic fairness. This happened again recently, despite having had multiple discussions about it, and I feel like I'm reaching my breaking point. The revenge. I typically fill up my work truck every 3 days. Since fuel expenses are a significant part of the company's budget, keeping gas costs low is a frequent topic in meetings. Historically, I've always taken those concerns seriously. I have a strong work ethic and made a conscious effort to save gas, even before it became a regular talking point. If I had personal errands to run which were allowed to do within reason, I would wait until I was already going to be in that area. Additionally, I was one of the first employees to go above and beyond by reorganizing my routes so that I could complete jobs in the same neighborhood on the same day, further reducing fuel consumption. Not anymore. Since my boss seems to think small differences in pay are negligible, I've decided to stop going out of my way to save gas. My work truck is GPS tracked, so if they ever get motivated enough to review the logs, they're going to notice a sudden drop in efficiency. If they confront me about it, I'll calmly pull out my calculator and explain that it's a negligible difference they should just get over, just like they do when I ask for fair pay. Story 7. So, a little backstory. I work for an internet provider company as a lead in the internet repair department. This means that I get calls from agents who either need help with a situation because they are stuck and don't know what to do, or when a customer escalates the call, asking for a supervisor, manager, or someone above them. My department mainly handles internet issues like being offline, dealing with outages, replacing equipment, and similar matters. The other day started off like any other. I was getting calls from agents needing equipment transferred from one account to another, scheduling technicians for customers who refuse to troubleshoot, and handling other routine issues. One of the most common calls I receive involves an agent asking me to run a special tool that adjusts the speed being sent to a customer. This usually happens when a customer upgrades or downgrades their internet speed, and the changes don't take effect immediately. Running the tool only takes a couple of minutes, and this will become relevant later. On this particular day, I received a call from an agent who said her customer wanted to speak to a supervisor because he wasn't getting the internet speeds he was paying for. This happens frequently, usually because many people don't fully understand how internet speeds work and all the factors that can influence a speed test result. These factors can include the distance from the router, whether the test is being done over Wi-Fi or with a direct connection, how many devices are connected at the same time, and even the structure of the residence materials like stone and concrete can significantly weaken Wi-Fi signals. When I checked the customer's account, I saw that he was subscribed to a 100 megabits per second plan. Our standard internet plans offer speeds of 300, 500, and 1000 megabits per second, commonly referred to as a gigabit. I asked the agent what speed the customer was receiving, and she informed me that the result was 437 megabits per second, well over the 100 megabits per second he was paying for. I instructed the agent to transfer the call to me so I could handle the situation directly. Once the customer, whom we will call Darren, was on the line, I introduced myself and asked how I could help. Darren immediately began yelling and expressing his frustration about not getting the speeds he was paying for. He was extremely upset and even demanded a credit on his account. I attempted to apologize and explain that speed test results can vary due to several factors. However, he cut me off, stating that he was recording the call and intended to post it on social media. I calmly responded that it was fine, as our calls are recorded for quality assurance purposes and everything would be documented. Darren continued to complain, using harsh language and stating that our service was unacceptable and that I should be ashamed of working for a company that doesn't deliver what customers pay for. While he was ranting, I noticed that he had downgraded his internet plan from 500 megabits per second to 100 megabits per second just 2 days prior. As I mentioned earlier, Sometimes changes in internet plans don't take effect immediately unless the modem is reset or a specific tool is used to enforce the change. I attempted to inform Darren that he was actually receiving more than what he was paying for, but once again, he interrupted me. He threatened to report us to the Federal Communications Commission and the Better Business Bureau, and he even mentioned filing a lawsuit, all while continuing to record the conversation. Under normal circumstances, I might have let the higher speed continue until the system automatically corrected it. However, Darren's rude attitude and threatening behavior prompted me to take a different approach. Cue the malicious compliance. I responded, "Sir, you are absolutely right, and I sincerely apologize that you are not receiving the speeds you are paying for. I will get this fixed immediately." Darren was on a special 100 megabits per second plan available only to customers who qualify for financial assistance. To be eligible, he had to apply and demonstrate that he met the criteria for the lower income program. Since he had recently downgraded his plan to this tier, he was indeed entitled to only 100 megabits per second. I ran the tool to adjust his internet speed accordingly, reducing it to the 100 megabits per second he was paying for. Afterward, I asked him to check his speed again. Darren responded, "It's even worse than before. What kind of trick are you trying to pull?" I calmly replied, "Sir, you mentioned earlier that you were not getting the speeds you were paying for, and you were right. You recently applied for the Financial Assistance Program, which provides a 100 megabits per second plan, and I corrected the issue so that you are now receiving exactly what you are paying for. It was inappropriate for us to be delivering 500 megabits per second when you were only paying for 100. I apologize for any inconvenience." There was a brief silence before Darren muttered something along the lines of, "This is ridiculous," and then disconnected the call. I documented the entire interaction in his account notes so that any future agents would be aware of what transpired and know that he was not entitled to any credit on his bill. All I can say is, be careful what you complain about. Story 8. This happened a few semesters ago when I was taking a course in urban design. Everyone was grouped in threes, but one of my group members wanted to join another group with their friend, so I ended up with just one other person. Not sure why the professor thought this was okay, but I wasn't too worried because I was fairly confident in my ability to do the work. The course incorporated elements from previous studio courses to tie together into a massive topic of urban planning, which included architectural design, environmental sustainability, urban infrastructure, and historic preservation. I tried to brainstorm with my partner on which direction we should take. My idea focused on residential buildings, as housing would address a huge demand here in Nick. However, my partner seemed content with making the project about industrial buildings, so I focused there. We brainstormed different ideas, but I got the impression that he just wanted me to take the lead, as he mostly agreed without giving much input. Weeks went by, and I constantly updated my partner on my progress via WhatsApp, while rarely getting any updates or feedback from him. It annoyed me a bit, but I was still confident in my work, which was enough to get us through the next checkpoint during our presentation. At some point during the semester, I got a really terrible kidney stone. It wasn't from junk food or a poor diet. In fact, it was from eating too many black beans and chickpeas. Side note, I had asked Chat to come up with a healthy dinner plan, which gave me a list of foods I used to create a meal plan that met my macro needs. See comment for more. I felt much better with my new diet, but it eventually led to the worst kidney stone of my life, which put me in the ER. I was on all kinds of pain medication and had to stay there for several nights. But it didn't end there. The stone was so large that it got stuck, and I needed surgery to put in a stent. Don't look up how they put it in, it still gives me nightmares. I had to wait several more weeks, endure passing deep red blood daily, and have yet another surgery to remove the stent before finally recovering. Throughout this whole time, I managed to put in some work on my project. I was surprised to learn that my partner did absolutely nothing and waited for me to continue working. To make it worse, I learned that he tried to present my work as his own. How can people be like that? I emailed the professor about my situation. I explained how I had done all the work so far and sent him screenshots of the chat as well as my project file, which included all the history logs. The professor reminded me that during the final submission, everyone had to put their initials on the slides of the work they had contributed. Okay, got it. Luckily, I had recovered and was ready to present my work. I left out the initials during the presentation since they weren't required at that stage, only for the final submission. I wanted to see what my partner would do. I even tried to cut him some slack by giving him some talking points on the parts I would allow him to claim as his own. Even though it was fully my work, he didn't take the opportunity. Instead, he kept cutting me off during the presentation to talk about my project as if he had contributed anything. He mostly repeated the same information I mentioned without bringing anything valuable to the discussion. The final presentation had several judges who were local professionals in high-level positions within the industry. The conversation was always directed at me, so I had a good feeling that everyone understood I had done most of the work since I had intimate knowledge of all the parts. Then came the last day to submit our work. The final slides included my initials on every single page. Apparently, my partner missed the part about the initials and also submitted an older version of my work. A few weeks later, I hit him up asking what grade he received. I was surprised to learn that he actually passed with a C+. He was surprised to hear that I received an A and promptly said he would have a talk with the professor about why he received such a low grade. Honestly, why are there people like this? Anyway, I'm not sure if this qualifies as malicious compliance, but I did follow all the instructions and ended up having one heck of a semester. Did I mention that I had morphine for the first time during my visit?